Have you ever noticed something that just doesn't seem to make sense? People seem to be buying less, cutting back on spending, but at the same time, the prices for everyday things keep going up. It feels like it breaks a basic rule of economics. Well, that's the very puzzle we're going to solve today.
So this is the big question, isn't it? You see people tightening their belts, you see sales slowing down, but the price tags just keep climbing higher. How is that possible? It seems to go against a fundamental economic idea that most of us are familiar with.
To really get to the bottom of this price puzzle, we first have to understand why there's a gap between the simple theory we often hear and the complex reality that businesses are dealing with every single day. Let's begin with the rule that seems to be broken.
Right, so on one hand, you have the textbook rule. When fewer people want to buy something, demand falls, and so prices should come down as companies compete for your business. But on the other hand, you have what's happening in reality. Demand falls, and yet prices are still going up. So what's the missing piece here?
And here it is. This is the key. That simple economic rule really only works if one crucial thing remains stable, a company's costs. But in the real world, costs are almost never stable. And that single factor, well, it changes everything.
Now that we've identified costs as the real game changer, let's explore how they rewrite the rules. We need to look at the real price equation, because a price isn't just based on how many people want a product, it's also based on what it costs to get that product to them.
In simple terms, a price tag has two components. One part is customer demand, of course, but the other, equally important part, is the total cost of actually producing and delivering that product or service. A business has to balance both.
I mean, just think about all the expenses involved. You've got the cost of fuel for trucks and machinery, the cost of transportation and shipping, the materials used for packaging, the price of storing goods in a warehouse, and of course, the wages paid to employees. When these things get more expensive,
the final price almost has to go up. A business that doesn't pass on these increased costs would eventually start to lose money. And this is true regardless of whether they're selling more items or fewer items than before.
Okay, let's understand this with a simple example to make it perfectly clear. We're going to look at a small, local business that many of us can relate to, one that might be facing this exact dilemma: a restaurant.
So, let's picture a neighborhood restaurant. The owner has been noticing that the tables just aren't as full as they used to be. It's clear that customer demand has fallen off.
But here's the catch. While fewer people are coming in to eat, the restaurant's own bills are getting bigger. The landlord has raised the rent, the utility company is charging more for electricity, the food suppliers have increased their prices, and they need to pay their staff a fair wage.
And this introduces an even bigger challenge, something called fixed costs. These are the expenses the restaurant has to pay every single month, no matter what. It doesn't matter if they serve 100 customers or just one. These bills have to be paid.
This is where the math gets difficult. You see, when sales are high, those fixed costs, like rent, are spread out across many customers, so the cost per person is low. But when sales drop, that exact same rent has to be covered by fewer people, which means each remaining customer has to carry a much larger share of that cost.
So the owner is left with a very tough choice. They can either raise the prices on the menu to make sure these higher costs are covered, or they face the very real risk of having to close their doors for good.
Now, this issue isn't just happening to one restaurant. Let's zoom out to see the bigger picture. The problem is often not just about one business's costs, but about disruptions in the entire system that delivers goods to us, the supply chain.
In a healthy economy, this process is usually quite smooth. Factories produce goods, they're shipped efficiently across the country or around the world, and they arrive on store shelves for us to buy.
But what happens when one of the links in that chain breaks? The ripple effects can be very significant, and they can directly impact the prices that we all pay every day.
For instance, if factories have to reduce production, or if shipping becomes slow and unreliable, the result is simple. There are fewer products available to buy. And whenever something becomes scarcer, its cost per unit tends to rise, even if overall demand is weak.
So, when you combine rising costs with a broken supply chain, it brings us to the final calculation for many businesses. The decision to raise prices is often reframed from a matter of profit into a matter of pure survival.
During good times with strong demand, a business is focused on volume, selling as much as possible. But during tough times with weak demand and rising costs, the focus shifts entirely to survival, making sure that every single sale at least covers its share of the costs.
And this is the crucial point. While it can be easy to label any price increase as greed,
Very often, it's simply the logical outcome of what you might call survival math. It's the calculation a business has to make just to keep its lights on.
So, to summarize, we've seen three key forces that can push prices up even when demand is down. First, basic operating costs for businesses are rising. Second, fixed costs have to be covered by fewer sales. And third, a weakened supply chain creates scarcity, making goods more expensive.
Ultimately, what this shows us is that the real world of economics is far more complex than simple one-line rules. Context, understanding the pressures of costs, fixed expenses, and supply is everything.
And that leaves us with a final thought to consider. Now that we've unpacked this particular puzzle, what other economic rules that we take for granted might be more complicated than they first appear?